An Israeli newspaper is now reporting that multiple officials in Israel are holding secret meetings with other countries around the world to discuss displacing Palestinians from Gaza, also known as ethnic cleansing. Now, let me just say, this is something that we have been warning about for weeks now. And all of the Israel defenders kept denying that this was the reality, because they wanted to pretend as though, no, you don't understand. Israel is the only democracy in the region. Israel is above all that. They would never carry out ethnic cleansing. Well, they're carrying out ethnic cleansing, and it is now abundantly clear. We have the evidence. Now, last Monday, Netanyahu said at a Likud meeting that he is in fact working to facilitate the voluntary resettlement of Gazans to other countries. Voluntary is a weird way of putting it when your plan is to make the Gaza Strip unlivable by leveling the Gaza Strip. So people feel that they have no choice but to leave the Gaza Strip because, again, it is unlivable in Gaza. No residential buildings, no functioning hospitals. This was the plan all along. Hence the indiscriminate bombing that we have been seeing in footage, in reports, in unbiased media that we've been sharing with you here at TYT. Now, Netanyahu said, our problem is finding countries that are willing to absorb Gazans, and we are working on it. The Prime Minister was responding to Likud MK Danny Danon, who claimed that the world is already discussing the possibilities of voluntary immigration, though the idea has been roundly rejected by the international community. And that's probably because the international community does not want to aid and abet the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. A senior official also says that Israel is now holding talks with several countries. Netanyahu's coalition is allegedly pushing for the Democratic Republic of Congo to accept thousands of immigrants from Gaza. In 2021, Congo's level of human development was ranked 179th out of 191 countries by the Human Development Index and is classified as the least developed country in the UN, or by the UN, I should say. It is currently experiencing political instability, lots of clashes between opposing political groups in Congo. Not exactly the type of place people would want to immigrate to, which makes it no surprise to me that Netanyahu and the goons in his far-right government want to push Palestinians out of their land and into a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo. A senior source in Israel's security cabinet said, quote, Congo will be willing to take in migrants and we're in talks with others. The idea was also raised in regard to Saudi Arabia taking in Palestinians, thousands of Palestinians, to do construction work. We'll go through more specific calls for displacing Palestinians as well. But first, here's Middle East analyst Muin Rabbani explaining how calls for ethnic cleansing saw a resurgence right after the October 7th attacks and the ongoing effort to carry it out. Let's watch.
The proposal that was put front and center, literally on October 7th and onwards, was to move the population of the Gaza Strip to the Sinai Desert, to Egypt. And this was an idea that was very enthusiastically embraced by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He was met with categorical refusal and rejection for this proposal, first and foremost by Egypt. And the US and European governments later came out with a position that they would oppose forced displacement from the Gaza Strip, leaving open the possibility of what we're seeing now, an Israeli military campaign, a primary objective of which is to make the Gaza Strip unfit for human habitation, and then the encouragement of voluntary, or what is now even being called humanitarian emigration in order to achieve the ethnic cleansing.
I mean, this is what we heard from David Frum on yesterday's show. I played a snippet of an interview that he had on Al Jazeera, where he tried to put a pretty face on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with David Frum, he's the person who would write George W. Bush's speeches as Bush was conducting his own war crimes in the Middle East. He's the one who dubbed the so-called axis of evil, fear-mongered about various countries that the United States should invade and engage in preemptive wars of. David Frum is someone who is so fully discredited, it is shocking to me that anyone has any interest in listening to anything he has to say. But he did in fact try to paint this pretty picture of the displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, arguing that they should be allowed into other countries in order to work and send money back to the Gaza Strip. And he said this knowing full well that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to take control of Egypt's border with the Gaza Strip in order to basically have full control of that land. You think Netanyahu's gonna allow Palestinians back into the Gaza Strip? Come on, come on. David Frum knows what he's doing, and so do various figures within Israel's far-right government, including a known terrorist, by the way, Bezalel Smotrich. He is a known terrorist. I'll explain why in just a moment. He's unfortunately currently the national security minister. I'm sorry, he's the finance minister. And then you also have the national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are both ardent supporters of these types of plans to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the Strip. Smotrich, who was arrested in 2005, get a load of this, while protesting Israel's evacuation of its Gaza Strip settlements, said Jerusalem could not allow Gaza to remain as a hothouse of 2 million people who want to destroy the state of Israel. We want to encourage willful immigration, and we need to find countries willing to take them in, he said. You notice how he made a blanket statement about the 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They're all terrorists. In their eyes, they're all terrorists. But let's be clear, the real terrorist here is Bezalel Smotrich, okay? He's a terrorist. In fact, he was arrested for terroristic activity prior to what he's serving as right now. It is disgusting that he's a government official, but what more could you expect from Israel's far-right government? And what am I talking about? It had previously been reported that Smotrich was held by the Shin Bet security service for 3 weeks on suspicion that he was planning to block major traffic arteries and damage infrastructure to protest the withdrawal, and was part of a cell of 5 people who were caught allegedly planning an attack with 700 liters of gasoline. They were planning to bomb a major road, an artery that runs through the area. That's who we're talking about. And he has the audacity to call all Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, half of whom are children, terrorists. Okay. Anyway, let's get back to the ethnic cleansing plans by the very political leaders in Israel who think they're not the terrorists. Now, to be fair, Smotrich was released without any charges, but honestly, at this point, I have zero faith in Israel's judicial system, or justice system, I should say. Now, back to the present day, where Smotrich also said during an appearance on Israel's Channel 12, we will be in security control and we will need there to be civil control. Okay, I'm for completely changing the reality in Gaza, having a conversation about settlements in the Gaza Strip. He wants the land, guys. We'll need to rule there for a long time. If we want to be there militarily, we need to be there in a civilian fashion. This was his plan all along, right? This war is, in his mind, a perfect opportunity to do something that he's been wanting to do since the early aughts. Get the Palestinians out of that land, because in his mind, that land belongs to the precious settlers who, by the way, carry out all sorts of terror against Palestinians, Armenian Christians in the West Bank. Those settlers. He's looking out for those guys. Anyway, let me continue. In a later interview with Israel's Army Radio, Smotrich doubled down. We need to encourage immigration from there. If there were 100,000 to 200,000 Arabs in the Strip and not 2 million, the whole conversation about the day after the war would be completely different. They want to leave. They have been living in a ghetto for 75 years and are in need. Oh right, Smotrich super concerned about Palestinians who are living in a ghetto in the Gaza Strip. A ghetto of Israel's making, let's be clear about that. Because when you're cut off from the world economy, when your borders are shut, and Israel, honestly an enemy state, controls who goes in, who goes out, and what your economy is able to do, the situation ends up being pretty dire in the Gaza Strip. But that is not the fault of Palestinians. That is the result of Israel taking control of the economic situation in the Gaza Strip. But they refuse to take any responsibility for that, as they refuse to take responsibility for all sorts of horrific war crimes that they have committed in the latest round of this disgusting and brutal war. Ben-Gvir, meanwhile, said in a Likud meeting on Monday, "We cannot withdraw from any territory we are in the Gaza Strip. Not only do I not rule out Jewish resettlement there, I believe it is also an important thing. I'm sure you do. The war presents an opportunity," he says, "to concentrate on encouraging the migration of the residents of Gaza," Ben-Gvir told reporters and members of his far-right Otzma Yehudit party, calling such a policy a correct, just, moral, and humane solution. Forcing people out of their land, a humane solution. Of course, forcing them out of their land after you make their land unlivable, after you indiscriminately bomb the land, after you destroy the hospitals, the schools, the residential buildings, the refugee camps. But let's be clear, it is not just those two calling for ethnic cleansing. On Tuesday, Intelligence Minister Gila Gamliel told Zman that voluntary migration is the best and most realistic program for the day after the fighting ends. Listen, it would be terrible enough if I were covering this story knowing that the United States has nothing to do with it. The reason why I'm so fired up about this story, the reason why we have stayed on this topic, the reason why we do multiple topics or multiple stories related to this topic on the show, is because the United States government is funding this, is providing support for this, continues to provide cover for Israel as it carries out its war crimes. Now, the US government felt pressure to respond to all of this because, they're just saying the quiet parts out loud. The US can't just defend Israel as its officials are just openly calling for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And we'll get to their statements in just a moment. But there are more government officials. Let's go back to Danny Danon, another of the leading supporters of the plan to encourage Gazans to leave the area. On Tuesday, he presented his 5-step plan at a conference in the Knesset. Demobilization, establishing a security buffer zone, Israeli presence at the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, again, trying to take control of Egypt's border with Gaza, voluntary immigration, let's please, don't insult our intelligence, it's not gonna be voluntary, and eradicating the terrorist atmosphere. I would venture to say, given all these statements we're hearing from Israeli politicians, the terrorist atmosphere exists in the Israeli government at the moment. But let me continue. Shockingly, Matt Miller, let's get to the United States and their reaction. Matt Miller is with the US State Department, and he actually put out a mild condemnation of what Israel is planning to do, which for the United States is a pretty big deal. God forbid the US vociferously speak out and condemn what Israel has been doing. But a mild condemnation, but that's what we got from the US State Department. Here's what Matthew Miller had to say. The United States rejects recent statements from Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir advocating for the resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. This rhetoric is inflammatory and irresponsible. We have been told repeatedly and consistently by the government of Israel, including the Prime Minister, that such statements do not reflect the policy of the Israeli government. They should stop immediately. A really good way to understand what the motivations and intentions of the Israeli government would be to ignore what they say to the US press, because they tell you what you want to hear. They don't want Americans to feel bad about the fact that they are financially and militarily supporting the ethnic cleansing and possible genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And so they'll tell you pretty little lies, and a lot of Americans will swallow it, they'll believe it. It's pathetic, but it's the reality of the situation. But pay attention to what these government officials say to the Israeli press, because they've been making statements like this for a while now. And I think that, when they tell you who they are and what they plan to do, you should believe them. Don't insult our intelligence by lying to us in American press and think that we're too stupid to not understand and see what's happening on the ground in Gaza. The footage is real. The fatalities are real. 23,000 Palestinians dead. The number is likely higher because it doesn't even include the number of Palestinians that are trapped under the rubble and presumed to be dead. But that's the reality of the situation. And we're talking about the vast majority of these individuals being women and children. And we say that because, when you think of the excuses that Israel makes, they're targeting Hamas. Well, you don't think of women and children when you think of Hamas. But make no mistake, innocent Palestinian men are also being slaughtered. In some cases, they're being detained, stripped down, humiliated. Doctors with absolutely no evidence of any wrongdoing are being rounded up and detained as well. But we're all supposed to pretend like everything that Israel's been doing is above board, and that since they suffered a brutal, disgusting, and awful terrorist attack on October 7th, well then we should just give them full reign to do whatever they want. They should be able to slaughter as many children as they want, right? Because that, in their minds, is gonna do what? Root out Hamas? I mean, the current Israeli government is a manufacturing plant for extremists. And I'm not talking about Israeli extremists. I'm talking about their military actions reproducing extremism in the Middle East. That is what they're doing right now as we speak. So this idea that they're rooting out Hamas is laughable. And by the way, the State Department's condemnation, mild condemnation of what the government of Israel has been saying recently was quickly rebuked. Smotrich dismissed the comments on Wednesday, claiming that over 70% of Israelis support the idea of encouraging voluntary immigration because 2 million people in Gaza wake up every morning with the desire to destroy the state of Israel. Do they, really? Is he in the minds of 2 million Palestinians? And doesn't this make it abundantly clear to you that they see every single Palestinian in the Gaza Strip as a legitimate target? And we're talking about a population, again, where 50% are minors, are children. So all of those children are the babies sitting up in their cribs, salivating over the idea of destroying Israel? Are they legitimate targets? I mean, the IDF certainly acts like they're legitimate targets. Ben-Gvir quickly responded with a tweet, and this is translated from Hebrew. He says, "I really admire the United States of America, but with all due respect, we are not another star in the American flag. The United States is our best friend." That made me sick to my stomach at the moment. "But before everything else, we will do what is good for the state of Israel. The emigration of hundreds of thousands from Gaza will allow residents of the border area to return home and live in security and protect IDF soldiers." The Israeli government should absolutely be separated from the Israeli population. When I talk about Israel, I'm talking about their government, because I fully believe that civilians should be protected under all circumstances. Now, with that said, I find Israel's government deplorable. I find it embarrassing that the United States provides support for this far-right government as it's carrying out its atrocities in the Gaza Strip. I am not a friend, and I do not ever want to be referred to as a friend of Israel's current government. And I would just ask Israelis in Israel to really consider how they appear on the international stage with the kind of representation they have with this far-right government that previously wanted to dismantle their system of checks and balances, do away with the power that the country's judiciary has, in order to solidify more power for the far-right government, for people like Netanyahu. Netanyahu is deeply unpopular among Israelis. He's also deeply unpopular on the international stage. He has destroyed any goodwill toward Israel on the international stage. And while the United States government continues to support anything Israel wants to do, regardless of how far right the government is, fact of the matter is, you look at polling among Americans, and they are not in support of what Israel is doing. So for the love of God, please do not refer to people who have a conscience in the United States as friends of this Israeli government. We're not, and we're disgusted by it.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.